I wasn't looking for trouble, but somehow trouble found me. I think trouble has access to some sort of advanced navigation software, like the kind that comes installed in rich folks' blimps. I'm Anonymous Cubed, and I'm a detective. I hate the rich and I hate their blimps even more, but it wasn't always like this. Once I thought I could be one of them. The rich folks, not the blimps. I haven't dreamed of becoming a blimp since I was but a wee child who was often plagued with nightmare visions of my own transformation into various forms of transportation for the elite and wealthy. So where was I? Oh yeah, trouble was finding me. I was just walking down the street minding my own business when this lady walks up to me and says, "I'm pretty sure you're Anonymous Cubed." "Yeah," I said, "so am I." She asked me, "You're also pretty sure or you're also him?" "Both," I admitted. "This is already getting out of hand," she complained, and then she pressed a photograph into my hand. She was a tall, non-Euclidean woman wearing a blood-red formal gown with a pair of sleek, gray sneakers. Her lengthy, jet-black hair was back and to the side a bit oddly, almost as though it were done to disguise something which had been done to the back of her skull. She said her name was Eve. "Who's the dude?" I asked her as I studied the photo. It was a short, middle-aged man with a bad haircut and offset eyes with a long, warped toothpick wedged between his lips. "None of your business," she said quickly before correcting herself. "I mean, he's my husband, and I need for you to find him." "I'm not in the business of finding husbands," I told her, which was a lie, but I wasn't sure if she'd realize that. "I'm pretty sure it says right here on your card that you do," she told me, and before I could object, she pulled from her purse and passed to me a small, folded-up piece of cardboard. I unfolded it and found written inside, in grape jelly but still also somehow in what was obviously my handwriting, was my name and the phrase, "I find folks for folks." "I don't remember giving this to you," I told her, and she explained to me that she'd found it floating in a dead man's drink across town. That sounded about as plausible to me as anything else, so I decided to go along with whatever her scheme happened to be. Her husband was a missing scientist and nobody liked him. The second part wasn't really part of the first problem, but it would make locating him a bit more difficult. "The last time I saw him," she explained, "he was playing with those ants of his." "In his lab?" I asked. "No," she said. "In his pants." This doesn't actually sound like the sort of thing I like to get involved with, I told her, but I knew it was already too late. I was ensnared. I was part of her plot. I was like the little boot that kicks the bucket when you're putting together a mousetrap. Remember that board game, Mousetrap? I used to love just looking at the little pieces. I don't know that I ever actually played the game. She gave me the key to his laboratory, which to hear her tell it was also the key to his heart. Luckily, it led not through his stomach, but into a small office on the west side of town. A small office enclosed on all sides with panels of thick glass, behind which was situated a massive colony of millions of ants. It was a farm or hive, or whatever you call that sort of collective, and it was mad. Don't ask me how I could tell. Maybe it was the pheromones. Maybe it was the way their mean little eyes watched me through the glass. But I could tell. These ants were mad, both irate as well as clinically insane. Have you ever seen an angry ant? How about a crazy ant? How about an ant that's gone clear around the bend with notable aggression issues? How about a million of them staring at you through glass that sure must be pretty thick, but sure as hell is still something transparent? And maybe you can even see it starting to buckle a little around the edges, where some of the ants appear to be pushing in unison, like a great big anti-hand, slowly forcing the glass to give way. I turned to run for the door just in time to hear a shattering sound, followed by the soft shuffling of the sand as it slid out of the frames and into its own terrible freedom. The ants I didn't hear. You don't hear ants, even the mad ones. They don't scream or yell, they don't threaten, they don't accuse you of turning their children into statues or suggest that there's a global conspiracy behind all our political factions. I slammed the door shut behind myself, and I ran. I came back 6 hours later with 3 police officers and a dozen hardened exterminators. Their leader was a tall woman who was too intimidating to look in the eye. She only had one, the other having been eaten out by a rogue starfish, or so she said. But when we cracked the door to the laboratory, all we found on the inside was an emptied out room. There was no sand, no glass, no various forms of equipment for regulating and controlling the behavior of the ants, which were all things which had previously been there. "Well, I reckon you did have some ants in here," the large exterminator said, sniffing at the empty room. "Couple million at least. They tried to clean it up, but you can still smell a faint trace of them. Maybe she could, but everybody else thought I was a nut, which maybe was partially true, but didn't have much bearing on this current case I was in." I went back to the woman who'd hired me, Eve, to tell her of my findings and my theory. My theory was that her husband had been doing some strange, sick experiments which had eventually driven the ants into a frenzy of emotional unease, at which point they'd no doubt found a way to sneak out of their enclosure and kill him, probably poisoning his coffee or undermining his self-confidence when he was attempting to handle some specifically caustic chemicals. Then they disposed of his body by breaking it down into about 2 million little pieces, which each ant had hidden under the floorboards of their home. Of course, I couldn't prove anything, but it was as good a theory as I could create. Eve lived in one of those giant domed mansions out in the hills, the kind that looks sort of like big pink eggs from a distance off. I knocked on the door and she peeped at me through a view screen, then she buzzed the door open, allowing me in. I wandered through the place, disturbed and annoyed by the home's layout, and eventually found Eve reclining on a large sofa in a room with an oversized fireplace in which burned a lifeless holographic fire. As she sipped a dry martini from a novelty Christmas mug, I told her the theory I'd put together based on the experiences I'd had while on the case. "Yes," said Eve once I was all done. "It's all true, I know." "How did you figure it out?" I asked her, legitimately perplexed. "They told me," she told me. "They told me everything." "Who told you?" I asked her, but it was right then that I noticed the sugar fragments on her fingertips, and the answer to my own question became instantaneously clear. "We're in love," said Eve, while just behind her in the other room, 2 million ants sat at devouring the contents of her pantry. "I understand why they did it, how they were driven to it, by my husband and his tests. I know because I was subjected to those same tests." And that's when she revealed the large bundle of wires running out of a hole that had been neatly drilled in the back of her head. I wondered why I hadn't noticed it before. "You're probably as mad as those ants," I told her. "I'm not mad," she insisted. "They'll say that, in the papers, in their Hollywood movies, but I swear to you now and for forever, I'm not mad. I just feel like all my life I've been watching other people have it all. Like for some people, life just makes them a cake and presents it to them like it's their reward for being good people or some nonsense like that. But I've waited. I've been good for so long, and now it's my turn. I've got a cake of my own, and I'm gonna eat it. Every last crumb." "Well," I said, "that's a nice story. But too bad about the ending." "What don't you like about the ending?" Eve asked me. "Not very realistic," I told her. "After all, everybody knows there's no cake in prison." And that's when 2 of the cops and 3 of the exterminators from the earlier scene made their presence known in this current scene, emerging from the shadows of the room where they'd laid in wait ever since sneaking in with me when I'd entered the large egg-shaped mansion. "You can't do this to us!" Eve screamed as she was placed in handcuffs and the ants were vacuumed up into a series of aluminum holding tubes. "We're in love! We're gonna change the world!" "If that's the case," said one of the cops, "she'll be making those changes in 3 to 8 years from now, once these charges go through." "You think they'll stick?" I asked him. The cop chuckled. "Aiding and abetting an insect for the purposes of marriage fraud? It's about as open and shut as a high-quality door." "I guess," I said. "What about the ants?" We'll probably just gas them and mush them up into a fine paste," explained one of the exterminators. "Super intelligent or not, they have no rights whatsoever, and I know a guy who'll pay top dollar just to eat that stuff by the bucket. Dips his toast in it, I believe." "This is way more upsetting than anything I'd meant to deal with today," I admitted to the cops and the exterminators. If it's okay with you, I might just look for something small to steal and be on my way. So I found a TV remote, a handful of jewelry, and a small bag of pills, which turned out to be just absolutely delicious. Eve ended up getting 16 years for aggressively assaulting her judge in the midst of her trial. The ants, I was told by one of the exterminators, who I still go bowling with every few months, were gassed, crushed, and cooked into a large casserole and served with ketchup. Sometimes that's just what passes for justice in this city. You have to make your peace with it, or just be angry all the time. But then again, look at those ants. Maybe you should just chill out. Anyway, I'm Anonymous Cubed. I'm a detective. These are my cases.